I remember the night the candles refused to die. Their flames danced in the windless dark, whispering our names as the clock struck midnight. 6 sisters stood beside me, trembling, beautiful, doomed. Outside, thunder crawled across the Tennessee hills, and the earth smelled of blood and rain. They said the ritual would grant us freedom, that no man's cruelty could age us again. But when dawn came, only our faces remained the same, and our souls began to rot. I was born in the summer of 1820, on the edge of the Cumberland Plantation, a vast stretch of land that seemed to swallow the sun whole every evening. My father owned the fields, the workers, and the sorrow that came with them. My mother was once a beautiful woman from Virginia, quiet as frost, her skin pale as milk, her eyes always looking towards something far beyond the horizon. There were 7 of us: Mary, Eliza, Ruth, Catherine, Jane, Rebecca, and me, Abigail. They called us the 7 sisters of Black Hollow. The townsfolk said our laughter carried across the hills like a hymn. But beneath our silken dresses and painted smiles, there was always silence, a silence filled with secrets we were told never to speak of. Father believed beauty was our inheritance, our curse, and our weapon. He paraded us before every wealthy man who visited the plantation, promising charm and grace in exchange for land, cattle, or coin. We were not daughters to him. We were currency wrapped in ribbons and perfumed skin. But the slaves, they saw us differently. They whispered that our family had once traded not only flesh but souls, that the land itself was bought with blood. I remember the stares, the trembling hands, the hymns sung at dusk. Even as a child, I could feel the fear that lingered around our name. When Mother died, the house began to rot. Candles melted faster. Clocks stopped ticking at strange hours. The air grew thick, sweet with the smell of decay. My youngest sister, Jane, swore she saw a woman standing at the end of her bed, a shadow with eyes like burning coal. Father said it was nonsense. But Jane's hair turned white that night, though she was only 13. Years passed, and yet none of us changed. Not a wrinkle, not a shadow beneath our eyes. At first, we called it God's mercy. Then, when the whispers began, we called it luck. But when the slaves began crossing themselves as we walked by, when even the dogs refused to look at us, we knew something was terribly wrong. Then came the winter of 1838. The river froze solid, and hunger filled every mouth on the plantation. Father grew desperate. He held a Christmas feast, one last attempt to buy favor with the local men who could save his fortune. We were forced to dress in velvet, our hair shining like glass. We smiled until our cheeks hurt. But behind our smiles, something was stirring, a darkness older than our blood. That night, a stranger arrived. He wasn't invited, yet every eye turned when he entered. His coat dripped rain, and his voice carried the weight of the grave. He looked at us, each one of us, and said quietly, "Your mother's debt is due." That was the night our story truly began, and the night we stopped aging. The stranger's words echoed through the hall like thunder rolling through a hollow valley. "Your mother's debt is due." Father's face went pale, his hand gripping the table as if it might hold him upright. He ordered the man to leave, but the stranger didn't move. He just smiled, a slow, cruel curl of his lips, and placed a small, rusted locket on the table. Inside it was a lock of black hair, and a drop of something that looked like dried blood. Mother's. The air grew heavy, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes. He slammed the locket shut, shouted for the overseer, and had the man dragged outside. But the moment the doors closed, a gust of wind tore through the room. Every candle went out. Every window shattered inward. The feast was ruined, but something far worse had begun. That night, we couldn't sleep. The storm outside wouldn't end, lightning flashing again and again, though no thunder followed. My sisters huddled in the hallway, whispering prayers, clutching crosses. I stood by the window, watching the fields below shimmer under the rain. The slaves' quarters were dark. No lights, no movement, as if the world beyond the house had stopped breathing. By dawn, Father was gone. The overseer found his horse dead at the edge of the swamp, torn open as if by claws, though no animal had been seen. The stranger was nowhere to be found, and carved into the wooden gate were 4 words that made my blood run cold: "Time will not forgive." We tried to carry on. The townsfolk began avoiding us. Even the pastor refused to visit. The servants left one by one. The plantation rotted. The mirrors in the house began to cloud, our reflections twisting, bending, refusing to follow our movements. One morning, my sister Eliza cut her finger while sewing. We watched as the blood dripped, and then stopped, the wound sealing before our eyes. We screamed. She fainted, and when she awoke, her voice was different, lower, older, but her face still young. That was the first sign. Then Ruth fell ill, but never truly died. Her heart stopped for hours one night, her body cold and pale. Then she opened her eyes and whispered, "I saw Mother." And she's still waiting. We tried to bury the truth, but the house wouldn't let us. Footsteps echoed through empty halls. Doors opened on their own. At night, we heard a woman humming an old hymn from the church we once attended. The same song Mother used to sing when Father locked her in her room. By spring, the 7 of us were all that remained. The crops failed, the fields turned to mud, and the graves behind the churchyard began to sink. I thought it was grief. I thought it was madness. But then, the stranger returned, standing at the gates, smiling as if time itself had never touched him. He said only one thing before vanishing again into the mist. "The debt was not her sin. It was yours." That was the moment we realized whatever curse had begun was far from over. The night we tried to end the curse, the air smelled of iron and smoke. The moon hung low, too red, too full, as if bleeding over the hills. We hadn't seen the stranger in months, but his words had rooted deep inside us. The servants had long fled, and the plantation stood empty. Nothing but the sound of crickets and the slow creak of the weather vane above the barn. Eliza was the first to speak of a ritual, something she'd found in Mother's old diary. She said it wasn't witchcraft. It was atonement. 7 candles, 7 drops of blood, 7 names spoken before the fire. She believed it could cleanse our family, free us from what Mother had done. We gathered in the parlor that night. The house was silent except for the storm outside. Rain tapped at the windows like fingernails. The wallpaper had begun to peel, revealing strange carvings in the wood beneath, symbols none of us remembered carving. A circle, an eye, and beneath it, a serpent eating its tail. We set the candles in a ring on the floor. Each flame flickered blue. I remember Jane's hands trembling as she held the knife. "If this is sin," she whispered, "then let God forgive us." One by one, we cut our palms and let the blood fall into the basin Mother had kept hidden under her bed. A basin made of black iron, etched with runes. It hissed as the blood touched it, as if alive. Then we began to chant the words. Not English. Not anything I'd heard before. The diary had written them phonetically, harsh, ancient sounds that scraped the throat and stung the air. The candles flared, and the room grew hot, choking with smoke. I tried to breathe, but it felt like the walls were closing in. The portraits on the walls began to bleed, dark streaks running down painted faces. Then, the door slammed open. Wind howled through the hall, and for a moment I saw him, the stranger, standing at the top of the stairs. His eyes glowed faintly, like embers in the dark. "You cannot break what you were born to carry," he said. His voice wasn't human. It was many voices at once, old, young, broken. "The debt was sealed in your blood, not hers." The candles went out. I woke hours later on the floor, the others still and pale around me. I thought they were dead. I screamed their names, Mary, Ruth, Jane, until one by one, their eyes opened. We looked at each other and knew something terrible had changed. Our hearts beat, but slower. Our blood no longer felt warm. And when dawn came, when the first light touched our faces, we cast no shadows. We thought we had broken the curse that night. But what we did was far worse. We invited it in. The first to change was Catherine. It began with a reflection. She screamed one morning while brushing her hair, and when we ran to her room, she was standing before the mirror. her face still young, but the reflection behind the glass. Old, wrinkled, gray, hollow-eyed. It moved a heartbeat slower than she did. Then it smiled when she didn't. That same day, the house began to shift. The walls groaned like something alive, breathing beneath the floorboards. Paint peeled in the shape of hands. The sound of change dragging through the hall echoed at night, though none of us could find where it came from. The slaves' old quarters stood empty, but sometimes we saw shadows moving inside, whispering in tongues no one remembered. Eliza said it was the curse claiming its due. Jane said it was the devil himself. One night, Ruth couldn't take it anymore. She ran out into the fields, barefoot, screaming that she could still hear Mother's voice calling from the churchyard. We followed, lanterns flickering in the rain. The plantation stretched before us, black soil, no crops, only bones rising where corn once grew. And in the distance, the old church bell began to ring on its own. Inside the church, candles burned though no one had lit them. The pews were coated in dust, the altar cracked, and yet the air was warm, pulsing. At the far end stood the stranger, hands folded, eyes glowing faintly red beneath his hat. "You sought to end my master's work," he said softly, "but you have only deepened it. What your mother stole was not time, it was death itself." He turned his gaze to us, each sister trembling in the candlelight. "Your beauty will never fade, your flesh will never rot, but every soul you meet will grow old and die while you remain. And when the world forgets your names, you will still walk these fields, remembering." Jane fell to her knees, crying, begging for mercy. But he only smiled, the kind of smile that made the air colder. Then came the light, a blinding, burning light from the altar that filled the church and poured through our skin. I smelled fire and blood. I heard my sisters scream, and for one endless moment, I saw Mother, her face calm, hands clasped, watching us from the shadows behind him. Then everything went silent. When I woke, the church was ash. The stranger was gone. My sisters lay in the ruins, untouched by the fire, their dresses still white, their faces still young. We walked home through the smoke, the rain washing the soot from our hair. But when I looked down, I saw my reflection in a puddle, my face the same as always. And yet behind me, 7 shadows followed, 7 shapes that didn't belong to the light. That night, we buried what was left of the church. But some nights, when the wind turns cold, I still hear the bell ring, and I remember his words, "You will never die, you will only remember." When the flames of the church died, silence fell over the valley. The rain washed the ashes into the river, and the wind carried away what little light was left. We walked home barefoot through the mud, the hem of our dresses soaked in soot and sorrow. I remember the weight of the night pressing against my skin, like time itself was watching us. The plantation was no longer alive. The fields lay still, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth and burnt wood. The house greeted us with its usual creak, but there was something new, something hollow. No servants, no laughter, no human sound, only the whisper of wind slipping through the cracks of broken windows. We tried to sleep, but sleep no longer came. My sisters wandered through the halls, their footsteps silent on the cold floors. Catherine's eyes had lost all color. Jane spoke to no one. Ruth prayed until her voice was gone. Days turned into months, and yet nothing changed. Our skin stayed soft, our hair stayed full, and our faces untouched. At first, we thought it was a miracle. The townspeople whispered of our beauty, calling us angels, daughters of grace. But soon their awe turned to fear. They said our house was cursed, that our smiles were painted by the devil himself. They stopped coming. The market refused to sell to us. And one morning, we found a cross burned into our front door. Father's body was never found. Some said he was taken by the same man who cursed us. Others said he had gone mad and buried himself alive in the swamp. But I knew better. I could feel his presence in the house. Every mirror seemed to hold his eyes, watching us from somewhere beyond the glass. The seasons passed, though we could no longer tell one from another. The flowers died, yet bloomed again overnight. The clock on the mantel stopped at midnight and never moved. Our shadows grew faint, then disappeared entirely. When I tried to mark the days, the ink faded from the page before the sun could rise. One by one, my sisters began to fade, not die, but fade. Catherine stopped speaking first. She simply stared at the wall as though she could see another world behind it. Eliza would walk outside into the fields and vanish for hours, sometimes days, only to return with no memory of where she'd been. Ruth claimed she heard children laughing in the cellar, but when I followed her down, there was only the echo of our own voices. Then, one morning, I found Mary in the parlor, sitting before the grand piano. Her fingers moved across the keys, but no sound came. Her lips trembled, and she whispered, "The notes are gone." When I tried to touch her shoulder, my hand passed through her like smoke. That was when I understood. The curse wasn't keeping us alive. It was erasing us, piece by piece, from the world that once held us. Now, the house stands like a mausoleum of memory. The portraits of us still hang on the walls, fresh as the day they were painted. The candles relight themselves each night. The wind hums the same hymn Mother used to sing. And sometimes, when the moon turns red again, I see the stranger standing at the gates, the same faint smile, the same dark eyes, watching, waiting, as if eternity itself has become his playground. We thought we had escaped time, but time never forgets. I no longer know what it means to live or to die. The world has turned over itself countless times, and yet I remain. The hills where our fields once swayed with cotton are now covered with homes made of glass and light. The river runs darker, slower. The church has been rebuilt 3 times, each stone washed by the same rain that once carried our sins away. And still, I am here. My sisters linger somewhere between shadow and silence. I can feel them in the walls, a soft breath behind my ear, a faint hand brushing my hair when I stand too long in the dark. Some nights, I hear laughter echoing through the house, young, bright, just as it was in 1838. But when I call their names, the laughter fades, and the rooms grow colder. I have learned that immortality is not a gift, it is an echo that never stops. It repeats every moment, every regret, until the meaning drains from it entirely. I have walked through centuries wearing the same face, watching generations rise and fall, and not one of them has remembered our names. Time forgets all things, except me. Sometimes, travelers come. They step through the broken gate, holding cameras and flashlights, whispering about the cursed sisters of Tennessee. They think it's a story, a legend told to frighten children. They take photos of the portraits in the hallway. I always wonder if they notice how the eyes follow them, or how their reflections blur just slightly when they turn to leave. Once, a young woman stayed behind. She said she could hear us singing. She asked if we were at peace. I almost answered her. Almost. But then she looked straight into the mirror, and for a brief, fragile moment, I saw my own face reflected in hers. She screamed. The glass shattered, and when the light returned, she was gone. They found her car by the road the next morning, engine running, door open. No one inside. Only a small, rusted locket lying on the seat. A locket with a lock of black hair, and a drop of something that looked like dried blood. I don't know if she took our curse with her, or if she became part of it. The world outside no longer frightens me. What terrifies me now is the quiet, the endless, merciless quiet that fills these rooms when night falls. I talk to the mirrors, to the portraits, to the ghosts of my sisters who no longer answer. I wonder if God still remembers us, or if he turned his face away long ago. Once, I thought redemption was possible, that someone might read these words and set us free. But the ink fades as quickly as I write it, as if the story itself resists being told. Perhaps that is our true punishment, to be forgotten, even by the memory of the world. If you have heard our tale, if you stand where the house once stood, listen carefully when the wind moves through the grass. You might hear a voice, soft, broken, still begging to wake from a dream that never ends. And if you ever see 7 figures standing in the moonlight, don't call out. Don't look too long, because one of us might look back. And if we do, your reflection may never age again either. Soft breath, a faint whisper in the dark. I am Abigail, the last of the seven, and I remember everything. Years have faded into silence, yet this house still breathes. The world beyond changed, but here, time stands still. I walk through rooms that remember every whisper, every scream, every sin. The mirrors never aged. They show the same faces. Young, flawless, cursed. I begged them to change, to fade, but they never did. The villagers call us ghosts now, unaware that one of us still walks among them. They don't see the centuries in my eyes, the weight of what we did. The man we burned, the prayer that turned to poison, it all lingers in the air I breathe. Sometimes, at midnight, I hear the church bell toll, though the church has long turned to dust. Each sound feels like a heartbeat I no longer have. And when the wind rises from the river, I can still hear them, my sisters, calling softly through the mist. Their voices fade, but the chains do not. Each morning, they sound closer, and I know they're coming for me next.